would I buy a property in a flood zone? And the short answer is yes. Now, let me get into this. Why would I possibly buy a property in a flood zone? My name is Thomas Regan, and over the last 4 years, me and my wife have 20x our property portfolio. The reason we have 20x our property portfolio is because we take an objective view in property investing. Now, a subjective view on property investing would be something like, that property's in a flood zone. Properties in flood zones don't grow in value. Look, if you think properties in flood zones don't grow in value, you're off your head, okay? Why am I saying this? Well, luckily, the place that my parents bought when I was growing up was in a flood zone. And guess what? They bought it for $300,000 and now it's worth 2.5. So, is it a bad investment? I don't think so. If you look at something as an investment objectively and you say, at some point in time, 30 years ago, it was worth $300,000 and today it is worth $2.5 million, and you're looking for a 7% capital growth rate year on year, then objectively, is it a good investment or not? Yes. Yes, it is a good investment. How can we actually objectively look at the flood zone and see if it is a good investment or not? You would look at it like this, right? You would say, this property is in a flood zone. Then you say, what is the capital growth on this property? Because why are you investing in the property? You want the capital growth. That's the important thing, right? So even though this property is in a flood zone, as it has been for the last 30 years, will it grow in value? Well, let's look into the past and see if it's grown. If it has, then you can't sit there and say, this property is not a good investment simply because it is in a flood zone, because you're just taking an emotional opinion, an emotional viewpoint, and you're subjectively looking at it and to make a decision that should be an objective one. Now, the way you would look at it objectively would be, okay, this property is in a flood zone. How is that going to affect this property's ability to generate capital growth or generate rental income? Or how is this property's, or how are the expenses related to this property going, or how is the fact that this property is in a flood zone going to negatively impact the expenses that I will have on this property? Okay, so if, for example, you are objectively looking for a property that is cash flow positive, for example, and the numbers look like it's going to be a cash flow positive property, you really need to dig a little bit deeper in the numbers and say, the fact that this property is in a flood zone, what additional costs will I incur because of the fact that it's in a flood zone? For example, it might incur extra insurance costs. It might not even be insurable. Then that might be a problem. That might not be a problem, okay? But for example, if you're looking for a cash flow positive property, this property is in a flood zone, you've already identified it's getting capital growth, but another criteria you have is it generates cash flow, and you're seeing that you can actually get insurance for this property, but the insurance is so high it destroys the cash flow, then for that reason, it's not hitting the criteria that you objectively want in your property investment, okay? So I had a few more points on that. So basically, think about this, right? Like, whether the property's in a flood zone or not, and I've got many examples about this, but I just want to stick on flood zone. Think about this, right? Like, what are the issues that a home might have if it's in a flood zone? Well, the home might get flooded. That's a big one, right? So how can you mitigate that risk? Like, does it matter? Like, for example, if the property is in a flood zone, but the property is up so high off the ground that the water can't get in, is it an issue anymore? If the issue was the water's going to get into the property, that's the issue we're looking at. Is that an issue? I don't think so. Like if you've got a house, one house here and one house here, and they're both in a flood zone, and you know, one house actually has the potential to get flooded, yet the other one is raised up so it does not have the potential to get flooded. Are they both at the same level of risk of getting flooded? No, no. Okay, so it's like you need to really open up your mind and look at really what matters, right? At the end of the day, properties that are in flood zones, they do go up in value, and I'm not saying as a blanket rule properties that are in flood zones are good investment. All I'm saying, I'm just making the point, if you're looking at investment, don't let an emotional opinion or a subjective viewpoint deter you from making a good investment decision. Just look at what objectively makes it a good or a bad investment, and judge it through those lenses. Hopefully this helps. See you guys next time. Bye.